You were taught that Christianity came to Africa with ships and soldiers, that it arrived in chains, after maps were drawn, after borders were carved, but that was a lie. Because by AD 49, Africa already had bishops. By AD 150, African thinkers were already shaping the entire faith. Before a single European king was baptized, Egypt, Aksum, and Nubia were already building churches, sending monks into deserts, and placing the cross on coins. So why did they tell you it came later? Why erase the fact that the first theologians, the first monasteries, and one of the greatest Christian minds in history all rose from African soil? Because that version of history puts Africa at the center, not the edge, as a leader, not a follower. From Alexandria's scrolls to the caves of Lalibela to the voice of Augustine dictating in Hippo, Africa was there from the start. And in the next few minutes, we're going to expose the forgotten facts that prove it. This is not a revision. This is recovery. Before Europe ever built a cathedral, Africa already had a cornerstone. In the heart of Egypt, along the Mediterranean coast, one city began to shine brighter than all the rest: Alexandria. By the 1st century, a Christian community was already forming here, and tradition says it began with a single figure, Mark the Evangelist, who walked the same streets as fishermen, scholars, and philosophers. But this wasn't just a group of quiet believers. By the 2nd century, the church in Alexandria had become undeniable. It grew into one of the 3 great centers of Christianity, alongside Rome and Antioch. At its heart stood the catechetical school, a place where Africans didn't just learn doctrine, they shaped it. They studied scripture, wrestled with Greek philosophy, and laid the early rules of Christian theology. Think of it like a university, where your professors don't just teach, they write the curriculum used across half the world. Coptic language and liturgy took root here. And even today, Coptic worship preserves echoes of ancient Egyptian speech. But Alexandria didn't just absorb ideas, it exported them. It sent its thinkers across the Mediterranean, and soon, debates over heresy, truth, and scripture were echoing in cities far beyond the Nile. Because Alexandria was just the start. The question now is, who turned the desert into the engine of global spirituality? The desert winds of Egypt carried more than sand. They carried a movement, one that would change Christian life forever. It began with a single man. His name was Anthony, a young Egyptian born around 251 AD, who walked into the desert and never came back the same. He chose silence. He chose poverty. He chose God over everything. And with that choice, monasticism was born. Anthony's cave became a magnet. Disciples gathered, word spread. The idea of living alone with God started echoing across the empire. But then came Pachomius. Where Anthony had solitude, Pachomius brought structure. He built communities of monks, rules, prayers, rotations, discipline. Like the first startups, they invented a work-pray operating system that would later be franchised across Europe. Then came Shenut, a fierce and brilliant leader. He turned the white monastery into a cultural powerhouse. With libraries, hospices, and thousands of monks, he made it more than spiritual. He made it civilizational. Ordinary Africans, farmers, merchants, scribes, chose simplicity over status, and the world began to copy them. They asked questions the whole empire would have to answer. What is truth? What is heresy? Who decides? And from this African root rose the next voice of power. Who carried this African authority into the empire itself? In the year 325, leaders from across the empire gathered in Nicaea. The room was thick with tension. The church was divided. The faith was on the edge of fracture. But from the city of Alexandria, a young deacon stepped forward. His name was Athanasius. He didn't lead with a sword. He led with words, and his words would save the creed. While bishops argued over the nature of Christ, Athanasius stood firm. Jesus was not made. He was divine, equal, eternal, the same essence as the Father. It was Africa, through this voice, that helped anchor the very heart of Christian doctrine. But Athanasius didn't stop there. After Nicaea, he was exiled 5 times. But no empire could silence him. His letters spread far and wide, sparking monastic revival from Gaul to Syria. And then he did something that changed history. He consecrated a man named Frumentius, sending him to preach in the Kingdom of Aksum in what is now Ethiopia. That single act helped birth Africa's first Christian kingdom. Think of it like an African scholar writing the terms of service for a faith that would circle the globe. Even the way we calculate Easter carries the imprint of Alexandrian logic. But something bigger was coming. Because what happens when an African kingdom doesn't just believe in Christianity, but becomes its guardian? Not long after Athanasius sent Frumentius south, something unprecedented happened. In the Kingdom of Aksum, a young ruler named Ezana looked out over his empire and made a decision that would echo for millennia. He embraced Christianity. By the mid-300s, coins that once bore pagan symbols were minted with crosses, bold, public, permanent. It wasn't just a change of faith, it was a shift of identity. This was the first African kingdom to officially adopt Christianity, not as a visitor's belief, but as its own. The church that grew there would become the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, one of the oldest living Christian traditions on earth. Its liturgy in Ge'ez, its priesthood, robes, and rhythms uniquely African. Its scribes created a manuscript culture so vast, many volumes still sleep in monasteries untouched for centuries. And at the center of it all, the claim that the Ark of the Covenant rests in Aksum. Is it verified? But it reveals how deeply the faith fused with sacred imagination. This wasn't a copy of Rome. It was something older, rooted, and independent. And now, Africa wasn't just receiving missionaries. It was sending them. Faith traveled north. Christianity climbed the Nile. And soon, the word reached the land of Nubia, Makuria, and Alodia. Because trade routes carried more than goods. They carried gospels. This was no longer the story of a few churches. It was a continental network of belief and power. But the question now was, did Nubia follow the same path? And once it did, how long did it last? The change was more than spiritual. It was architectural, political, civilizational. In cities like Pharos and Old Dongola, cathedrals rose from the stone. Murals bloomed on walls. Hymns echoed through towns for hundreds of years. This wasn't a footnote. This was a frontier shield. When empires shifted, Nubian faith did not break. It adapted, endured, and later faded. But it left behind stone churches, buried frescoes, and a story almost erased. Today, the murals of Pharos survive only because they were rescued, just before the Nile's rising waters claimed them. And while this unfolded along the southern Nile, another force was shaping the west. Back in Roman North Africa, a mind was writing words that would shape doctrine for 1,000 years. He wasn't a bishop in Nubia, but he would become the most quoted theologian in Christian history. So who was he? And how did Africa shape the very heart of the Western Church? In the heart of Roman North Africa, another legacy was being written, not in stone, but in ink. It began with Tertullian, a fierce mind from Carthage, who gave the Church one of its most important words, Trinitas. He didn't borrow it, he coined it. The idea of a three-in-one God found voice first in Africa. Then came Cyprian, also from Carthage. He wrote of unity, of one faith, one bishop, one body. But the greatest voice was born in a town called Thagaste and lived in Hippo. Augustine, philosopher, bishop, theologian, and still today, one of the most quoted writers in Christian history. He penned Confessions, a spiritual memoir still read worldwide. He wrote City of God, a vision of divine order in a collapsing empire. For over 1,000 years, his works sat on the shelves of every Christian thinker. Think of him as an African author whose books shaped the West's entire mind. Through these voices, Africa shaped the catechism, the canon, and the conscience of the Western Church. But then came the 7th century. Arab armies swept across North Africa. New empires rose, old structures collapsed. By the early 7th century, everything changed. Arab armies swept into Egypt. By 642, Byzantine rule was over. But the story of African Christianity, it was far from finished. In Egypt, the Coptic Orthodox Church didn't vanish. It bent, it suffered, but it survived. Under a native pope of Alexandria, the church endured, through taxes, treaties, and tensions. Its language, Coptic, kept ancient Egyptian words alive, not just in scrolls, but in prayer, in chant, in the everyday rhythm of the liturgy. And while Egypt stood its ground, to the south, Ethiopia stood untouched, never conquered, never colonized. And in the 12th and 13th centuries, it gave the world something no one expected, a city carved out of mountain stone, Lalibela, not built with bricks, but chiseled downward into the earth. Its cathedrals are also caves. Its walls are also cliffs. Imagine worshiping inside a mountain, where tunnels connect sanctuaries, and the entire layout forms a sacred map of Jerusalem in stone. This wasn't decline. This was defiance through art, memory, carved to last. Even as politics changed, the faith endured. Africa had been colonized before, not by Europe, but by empires. And still, its Christianity held on. The chants, the icons, the scripts, they carried ancient memory forward. So now the question rises, when European colonizers finally arrived centuries later, did they bring Christianity to Africa? Or did they find it already rooted, living, and older than their flags? By the time Portuguese ships reached Africa's shores in the late 1400s, and centuries later, when European flags cut up the map during the scramble for Africa, the story was already deep, wide, and ancient. Egypt had shaped theology. Aksum had printed crosses on coins. Nubia had built cathedrals. Carthage and Hippo had produced Augustine. Yet the myth still spread, that Christianity arrived with colonizers. It didn't. The lie shrinks Africa. The truth restores dignity. This wasn't a faith brought in chains. It was a faith born in deserts, carved in stone, and sung in ancient tongues. To say Christianity came late to Africa is like joining a movie in the final act, then claiming you know the whole plot. Africa wasn't a footnote. It was a foundation. And while the world debated doctrine, Africa was already writing, defending, and living it. This isn't just about correcting a timeline, it's about reclaiming identity, changing education, and confronting the narrative power that tried to erase it. Coins, texts, stone churches, they all tell the real story. The final question is, what does this history demand of us now? The greatest lie wasn't just that Christianity came late to Africa. It's that Africa wasn't part of the beginning. But the truth? Africa didn't just receive the faith. It helped found it, shape it, and carry it through history. Africa was never a mission field added later. It was an original homeland of the faith. And the proof surrounds us. Coptic and Ge'ez liturgies still chanted, monastic rules still studied, council decisions still quoted, books by Augustine still read. From Athanasius to Lalibela, from the sands of Egypt to the stone of Ethiopia, Africa's voice never faded. It was written into the foundation. Christianity didn't arrive with colonizers. It arrived with Africans. And it never left. If this opened your eyes, Subscribe for more myth-busting history, the kind that restores erased voices and forgotten power. Which milestone moved you most? Alexandria's school, Aksum's coins, Dongola's stand, or Lalabella's carved stone? Comment below and reclaim the story.